In homework 4.3, you are solving absolute value equations. These are a very different type of equations from linear in some ways and very similar in other ways. I'll go ahead and do number 4 with you. It says the absolute value of 2 minus 3n equals 29. What this means is the thing inside of the absolute value could either equal positive 29 or negative 29 because of this. If 2 minus 3n equals 29, then what will happen is when we put in 29 here, the absolute value of 29 will equal 29. But 2 minus 3n could also equal negative 29 because if we put in negative 29 for 2 minus 3n, it will be the absolute value of negative 29, which will be positive 29. So what this absolute value is doing is it's turning the value of whatever this expression is positive, and it'll equal 29 whether this is equal to positive 29 or negative 29. So what this allows us to do is to split this equation into two linear equations that we know how to solve. The first is 2 minus 3n. One of the things it could equal is positive 29, because if it equals 29, the absolute value will still be 29. The other thing it could equal, 2 minus 3n, could also equal negative 29, because if we do the absolute value of negative 29, that will also equal positive 29. We can solve these linear equations just like we did in Algebra 1. We subtract 2, and we get negative 3n equals 27. We divide by negative 3, and we get n equals negative 9. On the other side, it is the exact same steps. We subtract 2, but this time, negative 29 minus 2 is negative 31, and divide by 3, and is negative 31 divided by negative 3. That's a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive. And we get these two answers. There are a couple ways to write your answers. You could write n equals negative 9, or n equals 31 thirds. You could also write n equals the solution set. It needs to be in braces if you do it like this. N equals negative 9, comma 31 thirds. That's fine. Let's see. I've noticed some people struggle when there's more than one step. Let's do number 12. Let's do number 14. It looks a little harder. Number 14, we've got this absolute value equation. Before we try to separate the variables, we need to get the absolute value part by itself. So the very first thing we can do, this is not equal to positive 38 or negative 38. There's not some magic rule that just lets you switch things to positive or negative. We need to isolate the absolute value to absolute value of negative 9n minus 3 equals 48. We're going to divide by 2. And now we have the absolute value by itself. Now we can use our absolute value tricks, because what absolute value does is it turns whatever's inside of it positive. And so negative 9n minus 3 could be 24, because the absolute value of 24 is 24, or negative 9n minus 23 could be negative 24, because the absolute value of negative 24 is positive 24. So now I'm going to split this into two equations. Negative 9n minus 3 could equal 24, or negative 9n minus 3 could equal negative 24. Because either way, when we do the absolute value of 24 or negative 24, it will give us 24 and the equation will be true. You cannot, at the very beginning, just be like, oh, I'm going to turn this 38 into positive or negative. That's not true. You have to think about, well, what is the absolute value doing here? And we can solve this. Negative 9n equals 27. N is negative 3. Negative 9n equals, when we add 3, negative 24 plus 3 is negative 21. And when we divide, it's a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive. This needs to be reduced. 21 ninths is, we can divide by 3 in both the numerator and the denominator. That's 7 thirds. So n equals negative 3 or 7 thirds. Those are the two solutions for n. Do one more with you. On the back, let's do x squared minus 5x equals 6. The absolute value is already isolated, which means we can say, hey, you know what? X squared minus 5x could equal 6, or x squared minus 5x could equal negative 6 because either way the absolute value will give you 6. So x squared minus 5x equals 6, or x squared minus 5x could give you negative 6. Either way the absolute value will turn it positive. Here we have two quadratic equations, and let's remember when we're solving quadratic equations we need to start by making the quadratic equation equal to 0. X squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0. This can be factored. X minus 6 times x plus 1 equals 0. I was able to factor this because these two numbers need to multiply to make negative 6, but add to be negative 5. Now I have two things multiplying to make 0, and so I need to figure out, when you have two things multiplying to make 0, either the first one could equal 0, or the second one could equal 0. This is kind of like absolute values, where you split it up into two possibilities. Either this first factor is 0, or the second factor is 0. Either way, you'll have 0 times something, which gives you 0. To solve this, we just add 6 to both sides, and we get x equals 6. Here, we subtract 1 and get x equals negative 1. So x could equal 6, x could equal negative 1. We have this whole other equation from when the absolute value could equal negative 6. Here we need to add 6. X squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Do not lose your equals 0 here. This can be factored into x minus 3 times x minus 2 equals 0. Negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5. And here again we've got these two factors. So either x minus 3 could be 0 or x minus 2 could be 0. If x minus 3 is 0, x must equal 3, because 3 minus 3 is 0. If x minus 2 equals 0, then x equals 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. So our solutions are x equals the set of negative 1, 2, 3, or 6. You have a solutions provided for you. You'll note that most of the solutions are correct. You should not overly rely on your solutions. You'll notice that for number 23, the one we just did, in the solutions it says x is negative, or 10 and negative 28. That's clearly not right. If you get something that is different than the solutions, it should make you pause and re-look at your solutions. But if you write down 10 and negative 28 as your answers, you're going to get a 0 for your homework. So I hope that helps.